My first production, La Traviata by Verdi, I decided to depart from the original setting in 19th century Paris, and I drew my inspiration from the novel The Lady of the Camellias, and I intertwined Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. This gave me the opportunity to tell Violetta's journey in modern-day New York City, depicting her character as who she truly was. Her goal in life was to live a normal life, in a life of mutual respect. We saw Violetta ripped of her hope of acceptance and a happy life. However, we also saw her rising in the face of male dominance, thus breaking her imprisonment in the bell jar. Last season's 2019 production was Bizet's Carmen. I produced this particular opera both in New York City and then again in the beautiful area of Umbria, Italy. I set the opera in New York City in the early 1970s, just at the end of the Vietnam War. Many of our soldiers were returning with PTSD in an economy that was suffering from mass recession, and drug addiction was on the rise. I based the character of Carmen on the true story of Colombian drug lord Griselda Blanco. She was 17 years old and crossed the border of Colombia into the United States to smuggle the cocaine by sewing the drugs into undergarments and hiding them in the heels of shoes. She had a flourishing business in New York City and also Miami. She was a very, very brutal, powerful woman who I didn't really care that people liked. It isn't about that. It was about who she truly was.
The Ospedale della Pietà was an orphanage and asylum for bastard children who were abandoned on the streets of 1700s Venice, which at the time was a city that was full of prostitutes. So there were all these sort of unwanted children left on the streets until the Pietà was opened. The most remarkable thing about the Pietà is that in addition to taking in all these girls, they taught them music, how to play every instrument, how to sing, to the point where these girls became the premier orchestra of Europe. Because many of the girls were physically disfigured, they were abandoned in the street, they might have diseases or they might have some sort of mental illness, they always performed behind a lattice. That image was just so stunning to me that I had to write a opera about it. The central character of Pietà is sort of struggling throughout the show to figure out what she can turn to. She tries to turn to her own talent, she tries to turn to God, and it is eventually revealed that that character is, of course, the Principessa from Suor Angelica. Both operas are, to a certain extent, about the institutionalization of women.
The inspiration for Suor Angelica, I discovered a true story about basically a workhouse in Toon, Galway, Ireland, that opened in 1945 and didn't close until 1969. Pregnant, unwed mothers were basically imprisoned to have their babies in this institution, and after the babies were delivered, they were separated from their mothers. When we come into the opera of Suor Angelica, all of the young women are pregnant. Suor Angelica, who had had a baby years before, she's still in this institution. The visit from the Principessa, which is traditionally in the opera, is of course from the character from Pietà. I was so excited to put these pieces together with Jake and tell, again, the true story of women. So I'm very excited to get started. I hope you all can join us at the Narnia Festival 2020 as part of this incredible undertaking. And thank you so much.
See you there.
And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters 2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm, And today, we're delighted that you can join us. We're broadcasting live from Founders Park in historic Ocean Grove, New Jersey, right on the Jersey Shore. And we're delighted you can join us. We're a new and unique podcast community. We are a growing community. We're up to 465 subscribers, and we're delighted that you can be with us today. Remember to subscribe on YouTube and hit that bell for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. Like us on Facebook and invite your friends and colleagues, as this is an artistic community of people who are professional artists and people who love the arts, where we take you behind the curtain and we explore the most relevant topics and themes in classical music today as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. And in my 25-year career as a conductor, music director, educator, college professor, church musician, and finally as an artistic consultant, some of the most important parts of my development were my conversations with my colleagues. This is where all the collaborations form, the ideas crystallize, magic happens. Here we take you behind the curtain and discuss with some of the most prominent people in the field what's going on today in music. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, we had so much to discuss, and people are doing amazing things. My colleagues never cease to amaze me with their adaptability and their creativity in the face of insurmountable objects. So thank you for joining us today, and please tell other people about this. Today we feature Andrea DelGiudice, a wonderful voice teacher from New York City, also a stage director, and just a indomitable musical presence and a wonderful person. So Andrea DelGiudice, welcome to Music Matters 2020.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here in my apartment, like everybody else.
So you're beaming in from New York right now as we speak, from the Upper West Side?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, the Upper West Side, yes.
In the shadow of the George Washington Bridge.
Indeed. Inwood, go Inwood.
Inwood's such a wonderful artistic community. There's so many wonderful friends and colleagues who live in your building and sometimes right in your immediate area. It's such a great place. So I miss being there. I'm going to hope to get to see you soon in Inwood.
Yeah, it's been rough in the city, as you know, in terms of COVID and just, everybody being closed in. My neighborhood here is really a wonderful dichotomy of Dominican families, which really is the historical part of this community. 2 parks around both sides. And then, as you said, a lot of artists, voice teachers, singers, and this area is up and coming, sort of villagey. And now we've opened up all this outside space with tables and flower boxes. And it feels really like a new city. And of course, there's always daily joy in this neighborhood regarding partying and seeing each other. People are being, very good about mask wearing unless they're sitting at a table having a drink or whatever. And as you know, we're not open inside yet. So we're all outside and all grateful to see each other and feel like, life is starting to move on.
Starting to emerge from this months of challenging times. So let's go back in time. Let's talk about your development as an artist and tell us how you came to do what you do.
Well, I've been a musician my whole life. I mean, I remember playing the piano at 5 years old. My uncle Roger is a jazz musician. He was actually the arranger for the Platters for a number of years. And so he's a wonderful singer and jazz pianist, and I grew up with him. So I'd play duets, or when I started to just sing with him, we'd always sing at parties. And I guess it was a no-brainer that my mother said, okay, we're going to continue piano training. So I was a pianist all the way through high school, and in fact got into college as a pianist in general. And then while at Hart School of Music, I took a dare from a friend who said, I dare you to audition for the opera. And I said, opera? And they said, yeah, it's Hansel and Gretel. You can audition for the mezzo part. And I went, all right. So I decided to dress up like a boy, right? I'm binding, the whole deal. And I went in and sang Voi che sapete Cherubino's aria. And I got the part of Hansel. Who knew? I don't know why. I had always supported myself even through college summers. I would sing in restaurants and clubs and so forth. And I did a lot of Barbra Streisand and pop music and stuff, but I accompanied myself, of course. And it beat, working in a coffee shop or whatever. So I've always been a singer in choirs and so forth, but entering into a soloist life was really new. And I think it took me 2 weeks to change my major, because I said I would much rather be on stage rehearsing, engulfed in a character, than sitting behind a closed door practicing piano. So I think my extroverted personality had no qualms about changing my major. So I did study vocal performance. However, I wasn't able to complete my degree because during the time that in college that I was studying, we had Jan Strasvogel and Gunther Schuller there. And they had just collaborated on a piece called Die Gelbe Klange, the yellow sound, with artwork by Kandinsky. And it was in association with the Guggenheim Museum. So I said, well, I'll audition, what the heck. And I auditioned, and I got the lead, which was a Sprechstimme part for a mezzo-soprano. So I immediately had to go to New York for this whole production. And we had Frank Farina, we had like some big names, Peter Cazares, we had big names as these characters, which looked like giant Crayola crayons. And we performed at the Guggenheim. So it really led me into New York even before I imagined that was something that I was going to be privy to at that early age. So once in New York, I didn't want to leave. So I pursued my training basically by choosing my coaches, and was incredibly fortunate to coach with Gianpaolo Bracali, who has passed away. But I so want to say that he was just the heart and the life of opera, and really helped me develop an incredible way of studying, an expectation of myself, a respect for the composers, and I really, worked from the ground up in terms of my training.
We've had this conversation so many times about the old school and engaging with the old school, and that's so important for singers and for artists who are growing up today, is to get that experience working with these masters. And
particularly the old school of Italians. I mean, I very much believe that my stamina, the fact that I was a Puccini Verdi soprano, was due to the fact that the type of training I had was real. It was real. It was the training that Tebaldi and all of our older favorite artists of the centuries. It built from the inside out, and as a teacher, I am bringing that bel canto technique to my students as well. So I would say that I had my life in New York City. I was doing jobs here and there. I started as Despina, the first little roles that you do. And I went to Europe a couple of times to do audition tours, both in Germany and in Italy, and got nothing, right? Okay, so I went, spent all that money and got nothing. I flew back to New York City, and I got a phone call from Kathy Olson, who was my coach. And she's, of course, the head of Encompass Arts, one of my dear friends. And she said, you have to get to Cami Hall for an audition. I said, I just got off the plane. What are you talking about? She goes, curly your hair, put your red dress on, and get over there. So I get over there, and who's sitting there but Giancarlo Delmonico? And he was taking over Opera Bonn. He was in New York City because he was directing his production of Fanciulla, which we still have, in the house now. And I sang, 19 arias. It felt like that. And he hired me on the spot, and he said, I want you to come and be my Puccini Verdi soprano in Opera der Stadt Bonn. And that basically was to start my contract from a year from that date. I discussed it with my agent, my great agent, Peter Ransman, and also one of my dearest friends on the planet. And he said, you know what, you need to go and develop your career in Europe and come back and take over the world. So I did actually sing before I actually started my contract in Bonn. I filled in for a soprano who had kind of gone down with the ship in a Butterfly production at Scottish National Opera. It was a tour, so I was in England, Ireland, Scotland, and that really inundated my Butterfly experience, because I sang with tracheitis and bronchitis and all the lovely things that Scotland and England brings you in October and November. So it really was a great experience. I was so fortunate to work with Sir Alexander Gibson before he passed. So it was, I would say that from that European experience and then Bonn, I've really been so fortunate to work with the greatest singing artists that of this generation. I think you have a clip later of Johann Botha and I singing Il Tabarro together. He was my tenor in Bonn. We did all the works together. He and Alexei Steblianko, who was an incredible Russian tenor, who I think sang War and Peace here at the Met. And of course, Cheryl Milnes, Placido Domingo. That's who we had in Bonn. These are the people that I sang with.
Quite a illustrious cast.
It was, and I was still young in my late 20s singing these gigantic roles. I mean, I debuted with the.
What did you learn from some of those, the more experienced, older star colleagues? What did you absorb when you were there?
So interesting. In general, the roster of singers in Bonn were young. Giancarlo liked to take in the young singers because his productions were very athletic, very realistic. And so I remember coming home from Pagliacci rehearsals with bruises all over me because I'd get beat up and on stage. So, I think he appreciated that the young people would kind of do anything he said. I can remember René Collo not wanting to do certain things that Giancarlo asked. So I think I kind of learned from a lot of these artists as well as listening to them and just feeling the experience and in their quality of singing, how they combine those two things with the acting and what experience really looks like and sounds like. And I think it's hard to describe unless you're on stage and humbled by the fact that you're on stage with these people. I also felt in working with Placido Domingo, well, I know that's not a popular name right now, but I have to say he was an incredibly giving colleague. Him as Otello was breathtaking. And so I really, once I was really engulfed in all my roles in Bonn, Johann Botha left and he went to Covent Garden in England. So we had a string of famous tenors that would come in and take over both the Pagliacci and the Il Tabarro. So I was singing with Atlantov, and like I said, so many
Wow.
I never knew who was coming in. I just say, okay, who's tonight, and basically make sure they went in the right direction. So it was pretty great. I have to say, I feel so fortunate that I more than got my feet wet with that level of singer and artist.
How old were you when you did your first Butterfly, which was one of your, I think it was your most, the role you sang the most?
It was, yep. I've sung that over 95 times. My first Butterfly was totally unexpected. I was asked again by Kathy Olson. I think she was actually an agent then too. She said, listen, I'm going to have you audition for Michael Capasso for the Capo Opera Theater. I said, okay. So I went and I sang Mimi's arias. He goes, hired. I said, for what? And he said, Butterfly. I said, I don't know Butterfly. And he said, oh, don't worry. Your voice is exactly right for it. If any of you know Michael Capasso, I'm doing a pretty good impression. And, you'll learn it. I said, well, when does rehearsal start? He goes, 4 days. I said, 4 days? Okay. So I strapped on my Walkman and I lived with my Walkman in my head and I learned the role in 4 days. I was covering Pat Craig and then I had a matinee performance, but I did the entire rehearsal period, which was great because I was working with Michael and the cast and all of these, and I was 24. So singing Butterfly at 24 years old, it was the most exhilarating, frightening experience that I'd ever had because the immensity of Puccini and what this opera meant and who Butterfly was, and me as a woman playing that role and honoring who she was as a human being, not a victim, which has become a thing now with me as a director. It was really monumental, and it made me want to continue doing it, certainly.
It's such that opera, more than any other, whenever I conduct that show, I always have to give myself time before to kind of set it in because the subject matter is so difficult, and to watch her just get ripped apart throughout the show always breaks my heart as a conductor. So I can only imagine what it's like for the heroine to have to play that role, and you being and knowing you as a person, knowing you how emotional you are into your characters, quite a challenge.
I think that the production that I knew this character wholly and from the bottom of my toes to the top of my head was when I sang it at Austin Lyric Opera, and my daughter was 6 months old. So I brought her with me. My mother was there taking care of her. And I'd go to rehearsal, and she was in the hotel with my sister, actually. And they were watching the O.J. Simpson trials. I remember that because my daughter recognized the O.J. Simpson theme on TV at 6 months old. So I'd come home from rehearsal, and I remember my dress rehearsal for that, and leading up to Tu Piccolo Dio, and my throat closed. I was thinking about her, and I literally almost had a breakdown, used it and managed to recuperate from it. But I have to tell you, I remember going back to Gianpaolo Bracali, and I said, oh my God, now I know what you meant. He said, finally, she's a mother. So it's so much of that, and I don't think people realize, like, they feel like the baby's on the side. It isn't. It changed everything. And it changes everything for all of us as women, and in our strength and our selflessness, and also what it means to bring a child into this world, and who they are, and the love and so forth. So it changed the character for me, and the productions that I did after the fact, I felt had way more layers of depth in her character.
It's always amazing how every time you do one of these massive scores, as a singer, as a conductor, as a pianist, I guess it doesn't matter, because they're so complex and dense, and each of us brings so much of ourselves to them as well, that it's a constantly evolving process. Having worked on Butterfly with you, directing and kind of being involved in that angle, it changes everything too. And getting to watch you with your knowledge of the roles to coach the next generation to sing these roles is really a lot of fun, to watch you dig into them and to demand more from the artists and to inspire them. And how does that feel to take that role?
I feel very fortunate that I'm able to, becoming a director was a dare, and it was Jason Tramm's dare, right? He said, how about directing La Traviata? I said, what? Directing? Yeah, you know the role. So of course we engaged in this production of La Traviata at the Axelrod, and I literally pulled apart who she really was, and I came from that perspective and decided, if I was going to direct, that I wanted to really understand who the woman was. Who was this heroine? She wasn't a victim, and that's the first thing I start with. That's not it, right? Just the story, the true story behind how that person became into this particular part of her life, and what were the other facets of her. For instance, Violetta loved books, but couldn't read. So there were many different aspects to any of the productions that I've directed. But I think what's also more than fun, but really interesting, is that I can weigh in on the vocal and the acoustic needs of what this means to be on stage singing over an orchestra. I learned so much about my own instrument, the resonance, carry power, because I had to deal with that orchestra of 60, 70 players in the pit in front of me. So that's something that I hope and I strive to bring to my students in their lessons as well, because that's something that you can't learn from a book. You can't learn it from a book. You can't learn it in a teeny dinky studio. You really have to understand what it feels like to ride, and what stamina feels like. And I try to encourage all of my students to make sure that if you're offering me as arias, you should have gone through the opera already. You should put together a thing and just go through the opera, so you understand, are you really able physically to support this role? And I think I'm able to sort of weigh in on that too, even in the process of me as a director.
It puts you in a unique position, having known that. And how did you make the transition from full-time professional singer into teaching? How did you start that process?
So I was living in Italy, in Rome, and Alexia was my daughter. Alexia, she was still not even 1 year old, and I started singing on television, and I was making Disney films. I was literally the singer. I was the Little Mermaid, or I was this, and I recorded the films in Italian. So I was working, but in kind of a strange part of the business that I'd never imagined that I would be in. And during that time, I started teaching a few students here and there in my apartment in Rome, and realized that I had a lot to say. I felt a lot. I loved the sound that would come from that person. I loved the change in the sound that would happen. So of course I was giving lessons in Italian there. But when I finally decided to come back to the United States with my daughter, it felt natural for me to open up a voice studio. I was living in Massachusetts at the time, and it just exploded. I mean, a lot of people knew me as a singer, so there was quite a bit of publicity around me. And I started like everybody else does, slowly but surely, and I had a big studio south of Boston, and then I would commute into New York City and teach on the weekends. I'd find a studio and teach on the weekends. So it just kind of, balled up into what it was. My daughter went to Juilliard undergraduate for viola performance, and as soon as she decided she was going to Juilliard, I said, I think I'll move to New York. I mean, I'd lived for years, so I just sort of made my full-time studio here in New York, and never regretted it, never looked back, knew that I belonged here.
I see your daughter on the chat, so hello, Alexia. Shout out to Alexia DelGiudice, wonderful viola player.
With a new viola.
Oh.
Yes, that was a little 2-day trip we just took.
I can't wait to meet the new member of the family.
And she's named her viola Odele, who's one of the characters in the opera that I'm currently working on by composer Jake Landau. This was a project that was supposed to happen in Italy this summer in the Narnia Festival, which of course we weren't able to do. So I mean, God forbid I just sit home and do nothing. I said, let's do a workshop in New York City. Let's get together wonderful singers and workshop this and do a professional recording. And then when we are ready to either debut it in the spring on its feet here in New York City, but definitely we will be doing the paired production with Suor Angelica in Italy next summer. So this is really, wow, I have to tell you, when you get in a room with distancing, of course, and masks, and then people stand up and sing, your heart just melts and it feels like your life is back. They feel it, we feel it, and Jake's piece is extraordinary. He's an incredible composer, student of John Coliano, and very, very all melodic and beautiful and lush. His score is so lush, so it was right up my alley. So we're working on this, and in August we will do a professional recording, and we'll have a live stream as well. So that's been exciting. Again, my concept, which came from my research in an institution actually in Galway, Ireland. The town's called Tramm, and it was an institution called the Home for Mothers and Babies. I think maybe a lot of your listeners have either seen or heard about the Magdalene laundries where women were sent. Before that, this institution, which opened in 1945, was the home for pregnant, unwed mothers, and they were kept there in hard labor. Once they had the baby, they were asked to breastfeed a very short time, and then they were kicked out, sent to the Magdalene laundries or somewhere else, and separated from their children, most of which never to see them again. They were either sent out the children to be adopted, or what was tragically discovered by the researcher Catherine Corliss, who uncovered this whole institution and of nuns called the Bon Secours Sisters, that at the year 2000 they uncovered the septic system and found the bones, the remains of over 750 children. So as I read this, of course, I thought about Suor Angelica, and I thought maybe they were there. Maybe this is a story to tell about women, and many of whom were not young women who wanted to engage in sex. Many of them were victims of rape or incest, and their families just didn't want the shame, and they would send them to these institutions. So as I thought about designing my Suor Angelica production around this story, I said, I want to know the backstory. I want to understand, who was the Principessa before she came to Suor Angelica? Who was she when she was young? And so Jake and I spoke about another institution, Ospedale della Pietà, which was in Venice in the 1700s. Much like the Home for Mothers and Babies, women who were either disfigured or pregnant out of wedlock, they were kept in this institution. At that time they called it, I guess, kind of like a psych ward in the sense, in some parts of it. And Vivaldi came and gave lessons, music lessons, which extraordinarily these women basically became incredible
artists, sure.
Musicians, artists, and so when people would come see them, what was required was between the audience, because the women weren't allowed to be seen. So this is the premise of Pietà, and as we connect the two operas, it's basically Edita, who's the Principessa, her life, what happened, how did she come to be who she is, what was her connection to Suor Angelica. Pietà can stand on its own as well as an opera, but I'm dying to do the
That's
double
exciting.
bill. Like
I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see
dying
it.
to do it.
I know Suor Angelica quite well, but I can't wait to see how it pairs. And you always have such interesting concepts, and you're such a deep thinker that when you apply this philosophy to opera, it's exciting. It makes it alive and visceral. And the singers, you always work with such great singers, and it's such a pleasure to make music with you.
I never in a million years would compromise the composer. I'm very allegiant to that and faithful to the fact that I love this music, and much of it I've sung myself. So my concepts are not cuckoo like many of the productions I did in Germany, got to tell you. Like, you know, my Manrico's not going to snort coke. Well, maybe he will. Who knows? But it's just I really want to tell a story and develop an audience of young people as well. I mean, the themes around these operas, this situation, which was in 1945 or the 1700s, it still exists. There are still institutions that are imprisoning women. So for me to tell the story in kind of a minimalist way, which it's the message. It's who are these women? We need to know who these women are. We need to understand that these situations still exist.
Telling these stories through the power of the voice and through the grandeur of the operatic gesture, really, it's going to be a beautiful collaboration. I can't wait to watch it come together. How can people see when you do the live stream and the live performance? Right
now we're right in the midst of deciding how to do this. Obviously, and this is probably it's something I'm learning as well, as you know, Jake's piece is not published yet, and there will be there is a big buzz around the production, and industry people are very interested in the piece. So we'll obviously have a publicity packet. We have an agency that's working with us, and we may not be able to make it a public live stream because that is also putting your material out in the public isn't always what you can do before you actually have it published and protected. So we're still working that all out with the assistance of our agency and so forth, and deciding, but there will be a whole publicity packet, and the live recording, which is going to be, we'll be able to edit it and get that just as it is. It won't be staged. It'll be in a workshop situation, but they will be emotionally connected, trust me.
How exciting as an artist is it to be involved with something that's new and current, as opposed to something that's like Puccini, Suor Angelica? What's it like bringing a new piece to life?
Well, you pray a lot because you have an opening night, right? So you've done all this work and you've worked with the cast, and they're all so excited about the concept and who they are, and they've developed day after day. And then you say, oh yeah, the audience has to like it. So I really debuted both Traviata and Carmen in Italy over the past couple of years, and I thought, geez, they know these operas in its traditional sense. What's it going to be like? And much to my happiness and surprise, I'd have 16-year-olds running down the street after me going, Bobs, that was so cool. Tell me what really happened to her. Like, I couldn't believe it. It really just embraced them. And they came back to see the show a second night. So I was very heartened about that fact. I think in the States, we have many wonderful organizations, the American Opera Project, Beth Morrison Projects, and we are Ricky and Gordon. We've got a lot of that new work being premiered and touching our souls because the stories are very relevant to how we're feeling or what's going on. So for me to be a part of that as a woman director and my concepts coming from my experience as a woman, that's really exciting, and I will always tell the story from the perspective of the woman at the center of it. So
that's probably shifted so much from when these pieces were written, how that's shifted and evolved. But I think it's so important that opera as a genre has to evolve with the times, and we shed new light on the composers of the past through these productions today.
I mean, I think that, I think everyone should have seen it through the woman's eyes. I mean, to start with, I think that, we in the past have been male-dominated in terms of direction, even in terms of concepts, and I'm not criticizing that. I just don't want that. Like, I didn't want to play the character that way myself either. So, the Traviata, I really based the work on Dumas' book. And because his book was not like the opera, it was about her and his connection to the two of them and who they meant to each other. He read all the letters. He used to see her walking down the street with her mother, who was forced into prostitution. So there was a real life behind it, right? It wasn't just this girl partying. And so if I come from that perspective, Carmen, I found Griselda Blanco, a Colombian woman, and she was one of the biggest, richest drug dealers of all time, and really, wiped the floor with Pablo Escobar on a financial level. So I thought, as I looked at it, I said, she had cousins, and I really could see this as a real story in the Vietnam era when, drugs were prevalent and the soldiers were coming back from Vietnam. So I don't know how I think of them. I really don't. I'm not sure. But I'm a movie fanatic. I love films. I love movies. So I have them all sort of floating around in my head. And when I watch one, I'm not myself. I can really get inside. So I think that's a great inspiration for me too. And even when I'm working with my singers, I say, look, if you want to understand who this is, I want you to see this character in this film. Just feel what they're doing. I spent 7 years directing and creating the music program at the neighborhood playhouse of the theater, which is one of the biggest acting schools in New York City. So I've been around great actors and great acting teachers for a good amount of time. That also brought me to maybe another level where I'm really trying to equal the playing field in opera singers being good actors. That's extremely important these days.
We all have to feel the music. If we don't feel that depth of emotion, why bother? I mean, there's no more park and bark. If that was ever a thing, I don't think that was ever a thing, but it certainly can't be today with our visual society and the level of our entertainment on television and movies and streaming services. Opera has to keep up.
Yeah, and I want to be respectful of the physical requirements of singing opera. So as a director, I'm not going to ask my soprano to stand on her head while she's singing a high C, right? And that's happened to people.
You've been in those productions, I assume, as a singer?
Yeah. Oh, my God.
We have a question from the audience. Eve from New York says, what is some of your most memorable moments as a singer? And some good, some bad.
Oof, boy. I would say one of my biggest, most joyful moments was taking my bow in Edinburgh Festival with Sir Alexander Gibson of That Butterfly, and my opening night in Bonn with Il Tabarro. Those were really moments that I could finally say, oh my God, I did it. Like I can do this. I did it. And I think all singers come at some point to that moment. It can be a moment in your studio. It can be a moment that you didn't expect, where you were singing and then everything kind of clicked and worked. So I'd say those were really, really exciting moments. And wow. So the funny moments, I guess, I mean, I was singing in Hansel and Gretel and the house roof fell in. That wasn't very fun, but I mean, I got out alive. But yeah, the house fell down.
You brought the house down.
I
That's
guess.
Great.
Apparently I did. And I guess also in Bonn, the Pagliacci that I was in was the production that Giancarlo did in Munich with Teresa Stratas and Domingo, and it was really physical. And I was running back and forth on the stage up the rake, and Tonio was going to whip me, and I had to grab the whip, and I had this moment where I had to sing the aria in that high A. I had to hold it. And I was upside down on the toy box with my feet up and singing this like bent over. And I finally said, you know what? I don't mind this. It's a little bit of rest. I wasn't running around the stage. But the first couple of times I tried, I went, whoa, technique. Wow. So I think being asked to do that helped me to find my capacity to or not to, or what to do and not to do. So I think I have too many of those disaster stories, probably. Johann Botha singing a love duet with me, and I felt like an egg cracked, and spit ran down my face because he was 6'5". I'm 5 foot tall, and I would go, and under my breath I was like, Johann, back up, because we were best friends as well. So I mean, those things are just part of stories that I guess we all probably have many of them.
Well, you have some of my favorites, so you're one of my favorite people. And to hear your stories and your experiences is so wonderful. And I guess a lot of the people in the audience may not have been through this, been on the stage like this, or been working with these colleagues. It's always so interesting. Like one of my favorite Andrea stories is we're talking about Butterfly when she sings the high C. And it says pianissimo. No, that was
no, Bohème.
That's right.
Bohème.
And describe to the audience you singing a pianissimo high C in an opera house.
So I'm going to say the high C in Mimi and the high B in Do mi amor mio in the Butterfly,
yes,
right? So what you do is you hike up your costume and you run as fast as you can to the very back of the theater and you sing that sucker out in whatever way you can. There was no piano high C or B for me. That just didn't happen, right? I respected the music. I just tried to get to the parking lot to sing it. So that was my attempt.
It's good to know. People go crazy trying to recreate those markings when the curtains will do it for you if you go far enough away and face the other direction. Giancarlo directed his Bohème, and he made them stay on stage for the last high C, and I was like, "You're so mean!" So directors will sometimes do that to you. So well, what I love about opera to me is putting a lot of great minds together. When it works right, it's a lot of great minds, all who have interesting perspectives and ideas, and it brings out the best in each other.
And I do want to say that when it clicks and you do have a team like that, it's really breathtaking. It's because I would say, and I know a lot of singers who are listening right now to the show, we endure a lot. And I don't mean that in a self-pitying way, but we endure a lot. We are under the judgment guise of the conductor, the director, many different facets of what the production is. And I think it does take the years that it takes to develop the shield or just the security around yourself. I mean, I remember being told one of my first rehearsals for Pagliacci in Bonn, we were upstairs in this teeny room with a low ceiling, and I was singing, and the conductor, who's American, but he conducted at La Scala, he said, "Oh, your voice is kind of ugly." And I was like, ugh. Like I was like, how am I going to continue to sing?
Why would you say that to yourself?
Okay, so I like that. The rest of that rehearsal was not a lot of fun. The next day we got into the theater, and I was in the big space, and I obliterated this man's face when I sang forte in front of him, and he just went, "Oh, that's what you sound like." I was like, "Duh." You can't say duh, but you endure these things, and how you protect yourself, particularly with your voice. Your voice is you. You live in this body with this voice. It's so close to you as a singer, and I know what that means. I know what that means for myself, and I know what that means for my students, and in terms of when they make a breakthrough, and there's this release, right? A release, and this realization that they can make that kind of a sound, and that it feels like they had nothing to do with it. On the inside.
I love watching you teach. I called the show The Voice Whisperer because I've seen you teach so many times, and we've worked together now for many years now. We're getting there. And to watch you get inside someone, and not just like some people say, this is a tenor's voice teacher, this is a soprano's voice teacher. I've seen you be successful with so many different voice classifications and different types of singers. Some younger, some older, some professionals returning to check out their technique. And to watch the effect, watch the results you give to singers is truly amazing, because you get inside their larynx, you develop this, each one differently in their own way. They each have their own unique voice. They don't all sound the same.
Absolutely.
But they all they come away with new things, and you really have that skill, and it's something to watch. And I don't think you necessarily know you just do it. It's just you.
I appreciate you saying that so much, and there are a lot of parts of what I do as a teacher that feels sort of like I'm going into a little bit of a head spin, because I'm concentrating completely on what that person is feeling and how that sound is emitting itself. I think that the old great Italian teachers too, they had those ears. They had analytical ears, not like, I'm going to put a machine in your throat and measure the sound waves. Like, what the hell is that? You have to hear and then be able to explain how that sound is produced. So, the voice whisperer, I have to give credit where credit's due. One of my students, who's known internationally as her famous role as Bess and as Aida, Indira Mahajan, who's just an exquisite singer. We've been working together for a number of years, and she's become a very, very close friend. She was in my studio, and she looked and she goes, "All right, thanks, voice whisperer. I'll be back next week." And I went, "What'd you say?" She goes, "You are." She goes, "I don't know how you do that, but you just get in somebody's throat and in their head." So she canned the phrase. I have to say, she was the one.
I love working with
so.
Indira as well, and getting to do the butterfly.
Yeah.
We did it with her, and that was a blast to watch you prepare with her the butterfly.
That's she had done the role many times, and so reeking that role, and she had her daughter and so forth. You know, it's extremely emotional, like we talked about, right? And she is such an emotional performer. She is just the depth in which she considers a character and so forth. I mean, I feel very fortunate. I have a studio of, I guess I developed them, but large voices, right? The studio really houses a lot of verismo voices, and so much sensitivity and intelligence. I I don't want to name a few because other people would get their feelings hurt. But I mean, I've got people at San Francisco Opera, at the Met, and they got there not because they were ready on day one, right? They've really done the work and they've developed themselves as their sound, right? I don't want people to sound the same. I want them to sound like them. So sometimes that is your journey, is to peel away the layers of maybe what you imitated or what you think, and really find out, what does your voice sound like, right? How does it resonate? What's the color of your voice? And those are the things that I, as a teacher, am responsible to provide for them, and then allow them to repeat that technical access when they're away from me. I don't want them dependent. I want them to take this information and grow as artists and as singers. And so far, so good.
Well, you certainly have a cadre of wonderful artists spread out all over and working all constantly, and it's so much fun to watch some of yours. I've worked with so many of them because we work together so many times, and to watch them grow and develop into incredible artists and doing wonderful things, it makes me so happy too.
And you know, I think it's a collaboration. You talk a lot about that on the show, and I think that's such an important word, because when you're student and teacher, there is no hierarchy. There's an exchange of information. Yes, I hopefully know more at that moment, but it's an exchange and being able to speak in the language of the singer. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm talking about pretty famous students who, you know, in maybe in the last 2 or 3 lessons, they went, oh, that's what you meant. Right? Now, it wasn't because that word wasn't known to them, but their body hadn't kicked into whatever that was. And that brings me tremendous joy when they've really kicked in, or like, oh my God, you know, and they just leave so happy and independent, you know, artistically and vocally. And I get that experience every day, which I feel very fortunate that this is what I do for a living.
You and I, whenever we get together, we love what we do. And when you love what you do,
yeah,
it really it makes your work a pleasure.
Absolutely.
So tell me about the pleasure of your work in the era of COVID. How has that adapted your teaching and your life?
Yeah. Well, so, you know, it is this, and I live in New York City, so there couldn't have been a place more intensely paying attention to what this all felt like, as we all live on top of each other. So, you know, staying in, that wasn't fun, but we did it, and people are wearing their masks. I mean, you know, I'm teaching more virtually, obviously. I work by FaceTime, Skype. I find FaceTime's the best, and I think it's just because you're really in the room and you can hear many levels of the sound. I mean, I've adapted, and my students would probably love to tell you this themselves, but I really detail. Like, this gets me on your face. I can detail 2 measures, hairs coming out, because I said, look, you have time to do this now. You know, okay, there's nothing going on for 4 months. So let's fix all these little details technically and get your websites up to date with what you really sound like. Take the time to do what Garcia or Marchese used to say, okay, you're going to sing exercises for 2 years and then I'll give you a piece, right? Okay, I can't do that. But I'm doing it as close as I can, because you really can detail. You don't have the piano. You give notes, but you can't really play in real time. So I find it's done really interesting, in-depth work that it's not that you don't when you're in the studio together, but it's slowed down the singers, I think, the singers that I'm working with. And I said, look, you have to remember why you love this. You have to go back to okay, when I don't do it, how do I feel? Right? And most of them is a crappy. So it's a combination of those things. And I have a baritone who lives in Michigan, fantastic Verdi baritone, and he does porch concerts. Right, all the people come from the town. They're all on the lawn, and he has, and his news stations come and has videoed him and done interviews and so forth. So I see what you see too in the innovation. Of course, my student Christina Major, who did make an appearance on your show, she is famous for her toilet paper turandot and Tosca. You talk about creativity, right? So I mean, I think just looking at the artistic community and watching what's going on, and I guess most importantly, if the art and the expression and what we feel in this can help allay a world of fear, it's just so essential. I see so much fear. I see so much frightened people, and I understand we have to be respectful of what this is, and it'll pass, but this too shall pass is important. And in the meantime, if you can just, relax your nervous system by singing or picking up your instrument or finding what it is that helps you create. I think that's how I've tried to approach this. I haven't seen my mother up close until a couple of weeks ago, and still distance, and I stay in a hotel. But I learned how to do the grandmother hug, which is masks, turn heads separate, and hug. Oh. And we did it. It worked. So,
Yeah, this is going to change a lot of things moving forward, and but your words are profound and genuine, and we're going to make this through. Artists are going to get through the other side, and those ready to just get on the shore and start finish their swimming and start moving again will be ready, and there will be art.
Yes.
I have a question from Grace from Florida, and she asks, are there any exercises, techniques you would suggest to keep vocal range and to stretch as people age?
That's such a good question. So, I don't do the same exercises for every singer, because I really believe in evaluating what's going on, and then I create them. And many of the exercises that I create from the repertoire. So I know what the repertoire is. I'm a pianist too. I'm very fortunate to be able to also play the orchestrations. So I have basic ones where, you know what it is? Staying in contact with the movement of your breath. And that's an easy thing to say. It's not an easy thing to teach and learn, because it's internal. So I think that in dealing with a voice that's maturing, and particularly a woman, sometimes things can get thick. We have hormones to deal with too. Many singers, when they went through menopause, actually stopped singing altogether, because they just that shift for them took off, upper range, and others aren't affected at all. So all those things matter, I guess, in terms of what you're experiencing personally. But I do think that when I look at Tebaldi and Freni and these singers that did really rework their technique in their late 40s, I went through the same thing. And it seems to feel, when you've had a lengthy career of these big roles, it isn't about the weight, it's about fullness, but singing on the edge. So there are a lot of exercises I don't know, I've created them, but they're to really work the breath with the edge of the sound. And you're always giving the responsibility back to the body, because I think it's very tempting to weight the throat when we're not singing properly. I did a Bernstein concert it was a year ago, I think, and I had to sing Take Care of This House and the Peter Pan Dream with me, and I was on a big stage, a big orchestra on stage, and I had to also find the finite parts of the language and how to communicate it. And I found that was such a component for me of not over singing and not under singing. It was a real balance. So it is all about balance. That's a good word. You can certainly call me if you'd like to go through a lesson, or you'd like to explore. I'm always available to anybody. Right now, virtuality is pretty convenient, but hang in there. I know that can be something that's that feels frustrating and scary, because it feels a little unknown. But there are ways. There are definitely ways.
And how do people reach out and find you?
So my website, and I'm sorry because I'm all yelling at my students to update, and I need to update my own website. My website, AndreaDelGiudice.com. It's there. You can take a look. There's some things that are old, but a lot of student student videos of them in performance and so forth. My email's there, my phone number is there, so you can always, contact me that way. I do prefer booking on email because texts get lost, particularly now, right? Because we're all on our phones all the time. So that's a good way. I live in Manhattan. I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and my studio is here. I'm grateful for that too. So, feel free to contact me. Even if you just want to ask some questions or there's something about the show that you liked, or feel free.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Andrea. Continued success as you bring that your knowledge and your depth of passion to the next generation. You do such amazing work, and I can't wait to see you again soon.
Thank you. Me too. We'll coming to New Jersey soon, I promise.
I'll be here.
Promise. Thank you so much, everybody. Take good care.
Thank you for joining us for Music Matters 2020. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Be sure to subscribe to our growing podcast community and like us. Consider becoming a Patreon member at patreon.com/mm2020. Anyone who joins gets one of these t-shirts, which I'm going to send out to Andrea tonight. And thank you so much for being a part of us tonight. And please tell your friends and family. And remember, keep music alive. Good night.
Thank you.